Hi everyone, we are back again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all those who joined us from across the world. I'm your host, 𝐓𝐤𝐥𝐥, Head of Marketing at QKS Group. And once again, I would like to welcome you all to today's session on procurement in 2026, how CPOs or Chief Procurement Officers move beyond savings to enterprise spend control. Once again, thank you all for joining us today. Over the years, procurement teams have invested heavily in sourcing and P2P technologies, delivering strong visibility and savings. Yet, many organizations still struggle to sustain those outcomes in a day to day execution. In 2026, the focus is shifting from generating savings to ensuring consistent spend control across enterprise. In today's session, we'll explore where procurement execution breaks after sourcing wins and what chief procurement officers or procurement leaders must rethink in operating models, governance, and technology to close these gaps. I am pleased to introduce our speakers for today, Sanjeevi C. Ramachandran, VP and Lead Analyst here at QKS Group. Along with him, we have Sujin Thomas Matthew, Practice Director at QKS Group. Together, they will share practical insights on where value leaks in procurement and how leaders can drive strong spend control in 2026. We encourage all of you to raise your questions or any queries throughout the session in the Q&A section below, and we'll address them surely towards the end of the session today. With that, let's get started and hand it over to Sanjeevi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. And so diving into the topic. So we all know that over the last decade, procurement has done a remarkable job in terms of digitizing sourcing, contracts, and procure to pay, right? And if we look at system adoption, dashboards, and automation, procurement has never been more mature. And still, if I ask a simple question, is enterprise spend truly under control? The answer is often not quite, right? So today I want to shift the conversation a little, not from manual to digital, but from savings to control. So the reason is that in 2026, the real mandate for CPOs is not just negotiating better prices. It is about governing how the enterprise actually spends money. And as we'll see, those are two very different problems, right? So governing and spending are very two different problems. And I will walk through this in a structured way. First, why the traditional savings-led mindset is starting to break down. Then what we actually mean by enterprise spend control, because this term is used very often, but this is not clearly defined. This is more like AI, right? Whether you are AI integrated, enabled, or AI is a layer. This term, AI as a term, is being used often, but then it's not always clearly defined when it comes to the enterprise end users understanding level. So that's where we are getting to. So what we actually mean by enterprise spend control is what we're going to touch upon. Then we will look at where execution typically breaks, because this is where things actually get interesting. And from there, I'll introduce a practical framework, the 7 pillars that we see emerging across leading organizations. From there, finally, what this means for the CPO operating model when they are going into 2026. And I promise there's going to be no abstract transformation jargon. And this is very much grounded in what actually works and what actually fails. Next slide, please. So let's start with the core issue. So for years, procurement success has been defined by savings. And to be fair, that did make sense. That made a lot of sense. But savings has a structural limitation. Savings is just a moment, and spend is continuous. For example, when you negotiate a contract, it's once, right? You negotiate a contract only once, but then the organization spends money every single day. So now what we consistently see across enterprises is this. The enterprises achieve price reductions, but demand is not controlled. Contracts are being negotiated well, but they are not consistently used. Enterprises onboard suppliers, but performance varies extensively and widely. And over time, value starts leaking. In fact, on a lighter note, many CPOs tell us, we celebrate savings in Q1 Sanjeevi and spend the rest of the year trying to find where the savings went. Because the reality is maverick spend creeps in, off-contract buying increases, and invoice exceptions multiply. None of this happens in one place. It happens across the life cycle. That is what we need to focus on as a CPO, right? So while procurement metrics improve, enterprise spend remains largely uncontrolled. And that's the paradox. Procurement is creating value at the point of negotiation, but losing it in the flow of execution. So now moving into the next slide, where we are going to talk about why enterprise spend control as a concept, right? So this is a very important question. Is procurement really about savings, or is it about controlling enterprise spend? Because when we look closely, savings and cost management primarily addresses pricing. Pricing is just one dimension, isn't it? What actually drives spend outcomes is something very different, and it is something else entirely. How demand is created, how people buy, which suppliers are chosen, and whether policies are followed. Procurement doesn't just need to negotiate better; it needs to influence the behavior. And as most of you know, right, influencing stakeholder behavior is slightly harder than negotiating with suppliers. So enterprise spend control is fundamentally about not just what you buy, but how the organization buys. That makes the difference. And this is when it gets even more interesting, where we will make it more practical when we move to the next slide, which talks about what spend control means. When I say enterprise spend control, I'm really talking about 4 layers of control, right? The first level is going to be controlling the demand, working with the respective business units to reduce unnecessary complexity, standardize the specifications, and the foremost important thing in this first level of control, or the first layer, is avoid over engineering, which is what is the mother of almost all the problems. And the second layer is in terms of suppliers and approvals, controlling who you buy from and under what authority. So ensuring that supplier selection and approvals are aligned with policy is very important. It's not about convenience. A lot of enterprises probably in the pressure of the moment, or because of the urgency, or because of certain mandates that come from different leadership levels, right? We will go ahead, that supplier selection and approvals, we will still go ahead even if it is not aligning with policy. It happens just out of sheer convenience. The third layer would be contracts and policy. We need to ensure, the CPOs need to ensure that the contracts are actually used, because a contract that is not enforced is just documentation. There's nothing more to it. And the last and the fourth layer I would like to talk about is risk and compliance. Controlling risk, compliance, and performance is very, very important, because spend today is not just commercial. It is regulatory, cybersecurity, and ESG exposure. So what do we see is this shift? Procurement is no longer just a sourcing function. It becomes the commercial control layer of enterprise spending. So now moving into the next slide, we have about 7 reference pillars, which Susan would talk about, and then I would highlight a few critical ones from these 7 pillars.
Yep. Thank you, Sanjeevi. So before we move on to this slide, I just wanted to brush upon what we have covered in the previous couple of slides. So you would understand that we have moved initially from savings management, which was a point that was clearly covered in the first part, that is the risks. Okay, the mindset has to move beyond savings management. In the second part, we covered the segment regarding negotiations. So this is another thing where multiple stakeholders within the company, they understand that procurement is basically, at the end of the year, it's about savings. During the year, it is about negotiations. That's it. So apart from this, there is no other, specific or a major role that procurement has. But that is not the case. Through these 7 pillars, you would understand that there is lot of uh, different responsibilities and accountability that procurement has, and this helps to reduce the enterprise risk to a very low level. So to start with, I want to start with something that every IT person understands, that is fragmentation. So within procurement, it starts with spend data fragmentation. You can see that the spend data is usually not consistent across suppliers. It is inconsistent across categories, and it is inconsistent across services. This could usually happen because of not just systems, but it's because um, entire functions have not been governed from a single mindset. Okay, so the basic understanding before procurement came in was misplaced. So procurement during the initial part of the year had done a lot of work regarding this, but in the final segments, it's what to say, there are different functions that Sanjeevi talked about. The different negotiations or different suppliers have been used during the procurement process, which were not under policy, or which were not the suppliers through whom negotiations happened and large contracts were drawn. So from here, I would like to move on to the second segment, which is, or the second pillar, which is basically policy-driven procurement. So earlier on, we understand the importance of visibility. Here it is about visibility through workflows. So when policies are drawn, it's usually kept as documents, and it's not actively, placed under the workflow so that it can be controlled very well. What leading organizations usually do is that they enforce policies through workflows end to end, making sure that approvals, budgets, and supplier selection rules are applied throughout the spend and not after. This is very important. So from the beginning itself, the entire enterprise or the entire organization understands that it has to follow policy just because the system was made in such a way. Moving on to the third pillar, and that is sourcing discipline and category discipline. So this is related to fragmentation across demand patterns. Okay, we have to make sure that sourcing strategies are within the demand patterns and the supplier markets, and procurement ensures that enterprise-wide demand is completely structured and there's no fragmentation that is involved here. So you could see that the first 3 pillars is all about fragmentation, right? It's about spend fragmentation, process fragmentation, and finally, it's about strategy fragmentation. So moving on to the next pillar is contract and commercial control. So from here, we are slowly moving on to the strategic segments, and this is how implementation also should happen. So the common gap that usually organizations have, which Sanjeevi also mentioned, is that strong contracts has been made through proper effort that the procurement teams have put in to make sure that strategic suppliers have been selected and good negotiation has taken place. Procurement excellence makes sure that these negotiated contracts are completely being translated into actual value across the enterprise. So this only happens when we make sure that the entire supply or the purchasing that happens is through these strategic suppliers and less through those suppliers which are not under negotiated contracts. The next pillar is what you would think, where most procurement teams come in and they talk about, the major risk segment under the strategic portion of procurement, that is supplier risk and performance. So when you go through supplier management, which is, by the way, an ongoing process, you have to, or procurement teams have to actively monitor performance, resilience, compliance, and risk exposure to make sure that the value delivery happens across the enterprise and it happens in a very continuous manner. So through this, what happens is throughout the end of the year, we can also understand whether the performance of the supplier is could be better, and we are not again talking about tail spend management or maverick spends. The next pillar is about stakeholder adoption. So why this is an important pillar, or why is it separately taken care of, is because supplier risk, performance, contract management, category management, and spend management, all of this is not going to work very well if the stakeholders are not adopting it in their entire purchasing process in across different functions. What leading organizations usually do is they make sure that the procurement process is extremely simple, not just run through the system, but extremely simple and easy to understand for all the different functions and all the different teams where purchasing is involved. Another segment is to make sure that the procurement process happens in a as least of a time as possible, so that these teams can do their other business or the day-to-day business and don't spend too much time on procurement itself. So here it is very important to have different kinds of guided processes, which is basically the guided buying capability within these systems. And the last pillar, or the last segment that we cover here, is automation and AI. So at enterprise scale, in large companies, we have to make sure that as many processes under the buying is automated, so that there is least amount of human touch involved. So certain processes are such that, like for example, invoice automation or AP automation. These processes are where usually manual intervention actually not just saves a lot of time, but reduces the risk to almost zero. So what AI does here is it detects anomalies, it identifies risk, and improves decision making by providing different kinds of recommendation, or it basically nudges people to select from a list of suppliers, which are basically strategic suppliers, which are already negotiated from the procurement teams.
So these are the 7 reference pillars that consistently show up in organizations that are able to sustain spend control. Okay, so I would like to highlight a few critical ones from the 7 pillars that was just explained about, right? So we look at, so of course, AI and automation is one of that, but then let's start with policy-driven procurement. First, control must happen before the spend, not after. The policy need to be enacted in a way that this happens, the control happens before the spend and not later. And approvals do not scale. Guardrails will. Guardrails do, right? And the second most critical pillar among these 7 pillars would be, I would say, stakeholder adoption. Because if complaint buying is difficult, people will bypass the system. So, and they're very creative when they do it. Bypassing an established process, people get too creative. Okay. And the third pillar, I would say, is contract and commercial control, which is extremely, extremely important, because negotiation is just 50% of the job. The real value can be and is realized only when contracts are actually used in daily buying. And as I mentioned, automation and AI monitoring is one of the most critical pillars of the 7 pillars, because we should not be using these as buzzwords, right? But these, because these are actually a mechanism to continuously monitor price deviations, invoice anomalies, and supplier risks in real time. Because if control is going to be dependent on manual intervention, the scale at which it's going to fail is unimaginable. So it cannot be that way. So now moving into the operating model, which is the core of the next slide. Sujan, over to you.
So you must have noticed from the earlier slide that this small takeaway that I just wanted to give, that is, after talking about different layers of fragmentation, we went inside control. Then we understood about risk management through suppliers. Then we went to adoption, and that's when AI came in. Okay, so AI is not the first part of the process. Fragmentation has to be taken care of initially. The last part of the process is to make sure that compliance and governance happen. This is where AI actually comes in. So on that note, I wanted to go inside certain segments wherein CPO has a very important role, and this is where the evolution of the responsibility of CPO is actually happening. CPOs have an important role across finance, legal, and IT. You would have already seen some parts of it in the earlier slide where reconciliation and finance and spend keeps on coming up, which is basically a jargon that fits under the finance segment, finance function. Legal, everything related to contracts is where legal segments come in. And fragmentation, especially as a major challenge, has to properly involve IT. If systems are not talking together, talking to each other well, fragmentation is bound to happen. So these three layers, you have to make sure that CPOs are well integrated with the strategies of finance, legal, and IT. They have to understand the risk parameters with respect to finance, risk parameters with respect to the legal team, and risk parameters with respect to IT before they move ahead with those 7 pillars. And here are, in the slide, it's already given which are the disciplines under each of these segments where procurement teams and procurement head has to be properly focused to make sure that the 7 pillars are properly placed.
Exactly, Sujan. Because today and traditionally, procurement has always acted as a gatekeeper. Procurement was about approving, reviewing, and controlling transactions. That's how it has been. But that model does not work in a decentralized and fast-moving enterprise setup. So what we now see is a clear shift from procurement being a gatekeeper to a conductor, right? So working across the examples that you've given is fantastic. Working across finance, legal, and IT. So finance would be for budget and cash discipline, legal would be for contract governance, and IT for platform enablement. I mean, it's not about controlling transactions, but it is about orchestrating enterprise spend. Okay, and again, on a lighter note, this orchestrating enterprise spend in many ways is a more complex job, because now everyone is involved and everyone will have an opinion.
Moving into automation, compliance, and governance, and I guess most of the people would be actually very interested in this particular slide. It's about understanding which areas within the procurement function, automation, compliance, governance, and most importantly, AI is going to make a difference. For automation specifically, if you ask the vendors themselves, they have designed the entire automation process to make sure supplier onboarding works very well. They also have provided self-service portals for them to make sure that they are able to, you can get maximum predictability from the supplier side, so that you don't get surprises from their side. Moreover, it's also about approvals. There are certain kinds of approvals which have been very stringently put under policy, and you don't need procurement teams to go through this. It has to be automated. The last part is about purchasing itself. There are certain segments which has to be covered through a certain strategic supplier, which provides the best savings and mostly would be very important supplier in that particular organization. Moving on to the next, it is regarding compliance. In the past 6 months, I have had a lot of conversation with end users and consultants where they are talking about ESG related, invoice automation and AP automation related, and other segments within procurement where compliance is mandatory. So procurement is one of those primary enforcement points where enterprise compliance comes into the picture. So purchase includes usually the supplier contracts and financial transaction, and embedding compliance in all these segments, it becomes very important. So moreover, there's another facet to this. If all these segments are under compliance, and even if all these segments are under automation, the speed of business also quickens so that procurement doesn't become a bottleneck or a hindrance to the speed of business of the entire enterprise. Moving on to the next part is governance. And governance is what provides procurement the ultimate control so that they can always rest easy and go to sleep thinking that the entire enterprise spend is working under the policies and contracts that have been negotiated by them, and to make sure most of the purchasing happens through strategic suppliers so that a long-term relationship could be made. AI has a very important role specifically to make sure adoption is managed very well. There is multiple layers specifically with respect to understanding intent, where AI has made a transformational impact on procurement. This is so that what has actually happened is people who are even non-technical can basically have a conversation with the AI bot, which designs the entire workflow for their purchasing, and also make sure that it's compliant, it follows all the policies, and all the spend goes through the strategic suppliers. So this is an amazing, it's almost, you can't even believe that such a capability exists, but that is the transformational role that AI has in procurement. It also detects unusual spend patterns. It identifies supplier risks well before it actually becomes a risk. It monitors contract compliance and also makes sure that policy enforcement is real time, actually real time. So automation, compliance, governance together convert procurement from policy setting to policy enforcing system. And it may sound like a bottleneck kind of term, but actually it increases the speed of business, and actually different business functions which are not procurement actually find this dealing with the purchasing team quite easy because of AI and automation enabled systems.
So when it comes to automation, compliance, and governance, this is where technology becomes very, very critical, and in a very specific way. Automation is not just about efficiency, right? It's about converting policy into behavior. We just heard it a few seconds back, because digital platforms today can do a lot of things. They can orchestrate workflows for you, they can enforce contract usage, and embed compliance into buying journeys. And with AI, there are things that will transform the way that CPOs are operating, right? AI helps you detect anomalies, predict risks, and trigger actions proactively. And see, automation is what that turns procurement policy into an actual enterprise behavior. So policy needs to become a behavior, right? Because without that, policy documents tend to have a very limited audience. Policy documents, in fact, do not have audience unless it is enforced. So moving to the next slide, we would like to leave you with one very clear takeaway. So over the last decade, procurement has been measured by how well it negotiated savings, right? And in 2026, this is not enough for the CPOs, because savings by itself does not protect margins. Savings by itself does not ensure compliance at all. And savings by itself does not control how the organization actually spends, right? So the mandate for the CPO is changing, almost changed from negotiating savings to actually governing the enterprise spend. Because as I said during the beginning of this presentation, I've heard CPOs telling me we saved quite a bit in Q1, but then Q2, Q3, Q4, we spent time trying to find out where that savings went. So I mean, when we move from negotiation savings to governing enterprise spend, right? So it means that success must be measured very efficiently and very differently now. Success will not again be measured by what you negotiated, but what it actually holds, right? Say, how much of your spend is truly under control, how consistently contracts are used, not just signed, whether policies are followed without constant intervention, whether suppliers are reliable, while also being cost effective, and whether your stakeholders actually adopt procurement. I mean, and making sure that they don't bypass it, which means again, policy enforcement and compliance comes into picture. Because as many of you know, a contract that is not used is one of the most expensive documents in the organization, right? And what we constantly, from our experience, QK's group with a kind of large and leadership and enterprise end user ecosystem, right? So what we have consistently seen are a couple of things. One is organizations that achieve enterprise spend control actually protect margins even in volatile markets. They build stronger and more reliable supplier ecosystems, and they reduce risk. They just don't report risk, right? And most importantly, they turn procurement into a true enterprise control function, right? It's not a transaction anymore, because ultimately procurement does not fail at sourcing, it fails at execution. And the chief procurement officers who fix execution are the ones who will define procurement excellence in 2026 and beyond. So with this, we would like to thank you for this opportunity, and we welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Sanjeevi, and thank you, Sujan, for taking us through that. And in fact, I'm sure our procurement leaders are much prepared for 2026 in excelling procurement and spend controls. With that, once again, I would like to encourage all of you to drop your questions in the Q&A section below if you have any queries that you had throughout the session. Though we have a couple of questions for you guys, I would like to take it one by one. Starting with, so one question has come which says, how do we drive adoption from business stakeholders who bypass procurement? I think it's a good question. Who wants to take this up?
So sounds like an easy question, so let me take it. So, I mean, so on a lighter note, I said that, but then this is one of the largest challenges that is being faced by the market, the vendors, the end users, everybody. It's a great question. And I would probably say that this is the question in procurement today, because if stakeholders are bypassing procurement, it's not a compliance issue, it's a design issue. So, and most of the organizations today tend to solve this with more approvals, stricter policies, and tighter controls. But in reality, you cannot enforce adoption through friction. In fact, the more steps you add, the more creative your stakeholders will become. We have seen everything from urgent one-time purchases to suppliers being onboarded faster than procurement can spell onboarding. So it cannot be enforced. I mean, adoption cannot be enforced through friction. So the design, the structure, or the root cause need to be addressed, and the 7 pillars that we referenced earlier, and 4 of those critical pillars out of the 7 pillars, they need to be operationalized for this to happen.
Right. And I think, today's insights that we had shared is definitely an answer to the question that has come up itself. Now, moving on to the next question. How long does it realistically take to move towards enterprise spend control? Who wants
I
to
would like
volunteer? Yeah, perfect. Go ahead, Sujit.
to take so actually when you talk about enterprise spend control, you're basically you are referencing to the part where we talked about the 7 pillars, right?
Mhm.
So here we have arranged it in a certain way that it starts from it has to follow those steps. So it should start from spend fragmentation. So that's the first problem that you deal with. So it's you have to understand that this is not a single time fix kind of a problem. It has to be done in stages. So you could say that could spend around 6 to 12 months to understand the visibility and the initial control. So just after fragmentation is stopped doesn't mean that you know you can use it immediately. It has to be made sure that it's visible through all the systems, and you can have different kinds of insights and intelligence that you get from that data. So around another year could be spent in understanding, okay, which are the segments which require proper stringent policies, which are the different segments where compliance becomes very important, which are the segments, especially like sourcing. There are different categories where ESG is very strict. So after you finish policy enforcement, category alignment, process alignment, and governance, then you go into the segment where you understand which are the segments you want to automate. So it's a ongoing process, and this is just an average timeline, but it would depend based on the size of the company and how many different geographical locations, how many different categories of spend are there, and what is the transactional uh, speed, means transactional length of the number of different kinds of transactions that happened, purchasing transactions that happened. So it's it's not just speed. What you have to remember, the mindset is more important. The mindset is that it has to become a sustainable process. It has to be made sure that the governance and compliance are the only things that has to be looked at in the next coming years.
Exactly. And I would like to add a point here. This is not a quick fix. It's typically a 12 to 24-month journey, because here an organization is not just implementing tools, right? So they're also changing how the entire organization buys, and that's where most of the effort and the real value lies. So realistically, you are looking at a 12 to 24-month journey to see meaningful and sustained impact. And even then, it is not done, because the moment you think your spend is fully under control, right? Someone in the organization somewhere is signing a small urgent contract outside the system. Okay, so just to summarize, technology can only accelerate the journey, but spend control is ultimately a behavior change program, if I may call it, and behavior takes time to change. So going for a quick fix, in our experience, when I say our experience, the experience that we have heard from CPOs, going for a quick fix has actually worsened the issue and have made it into a problem.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for that, Sanjeevi. And I just want to mention that to all those who have any queries further, feel free to drop your questions directly via mail to us. You have my mail ID to all those who have attended us today. And I've noticed that some of you joined us a bit late today, and then no worries, you have the entire recording available on our website. So as we conclude today's session, I would like to sincerely thank all of you for taking your time to join us and to be a part of this discussion today. Today's conversation clearly highlighted while procurement has made stronger progress in driving savings, true impact in 2026 will only come from the ability to sustain those outcomes through consistent spend controls across the enterprise. We hope the insights shared today have provided you with a clear perspective on where execution gaps still exist and what must change moving forward. A special thanks to Sanjeevi and Sujan for sharing their valuable insights and practical guidance on how procurement leaders or CPOs can move beyond savings and build stronger execution-driven procurement models. And to all our attendees, once again, I would like to thank you all for your time. Do stay updated on our latest research insights and all our upcoming webinars. Follow us on follow us on LinkedIn at qksgroup.com, and do visit our website for the upcoming webinars and insights that we have for all of you. We look forward to having you all join us for the future sessions. With that, once again, thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you very much. Have a good day ahead, everyone. Thanks, Sujan. Thanks, Anish.